Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about perils of free trade. Just what is the Trans-Pacific Partnership and how would it affect people? Let's take a look at a movie which introduces some of the basic issues of what's called the TPP.
This video is about corporate America's latest major power grab, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement, sometimes called the TPP. The TPP is an international pact currently under negotiation between the United States and countries throughout the Pacific Rim. It is intended to set the norms for free trade and investment globally. Free trade sounds like a good thing, but what it means in the TPP is giving big corporations the power to shift jobs around the world to wherever workers are the most exploited and environmental regulations are the weakest. Often that means having free trade with countries where people are denied their basic freedoms and are put in jail or shot simply for speaking out in favor of better working conditions. You may have heard about China's high-tech sweatshops, where young people work for long hours, for low pay, often living in cramped dormitories hundreds of miles away from their families. Conditions are so bad, one of the biggest companies decided to install nets outside its dorms to prevent workers from jumping out the window and committing suicide. One of the reasons corporations want the TPP is because they feel that Chinese sweatshop workers are paid too well, and they're seeking out lower-cost labor in countries like Vietnam. If the TPP is enacted, it will accelerate what's been called the global race to the bottom. Good-paying jobs will continue to leave the United States in favor of lower and lower-paid countries, and there will be a huge downward pressure on wages and benefits on jobs throughout the world. That alone puts a lot of power in corporations' hands. But what else do corporations want with the TPP? The pharmaceutical giants want to use the TPP to extend the length of their drug patents, increasing healthcare costs in the United States and denying people in developing countries access to life-saving medications. Extractive industries want to increase offshore drilling, open-pit mining, and clear-cutting in some of the most pristine and biodiverse ecosystems left on Earth. By reducing tariffs, quotas, and other barriers to rip-and-ship exporting, the TPP will help them to do so. Wall Street banks, insurance companies, and hedge funds want to use the TPP to block the implementation of common-sense financial reforms designed to regulate against too-big-to-fail and toxic derivatives. Big Ag wants to use the TPP to consolidate global food supplies into the hands of fewer and fewer corporate middlemen, a practice that pushes family farmers off their land and leads to wild food price fluctuations for consumers. And a wide range of transnational corporations have been pushing for the TPP to include so-called investor state provisions that would allow them special powers to sue governments in international tribunals for enacting virtually any new public interest policy that affects their expectation of profits. Investor state puts climate change regulations, food safety protections, financial reform, and a host of other democratic policies on the chopping block. U.S. trade negotiators are pushing to complete the TPP this year, and they're trying to keep it under the radar. The best way to stop the TPP is to drag it into the light of day. Right now, negotiators have appointed approximately 600 corporate lobbyists to serve as cleared advisors on the TPP, while refusing to release any of their negotiating proposals for public review. Please visit the website citizenstrade.org to sign a petition demanding that negotiators release their TPP proposals for public scrutiny. Please also share this video with your friends. The corporate media is unlikely to inform the public about the TPP. We need to do it ourselves.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. We're going to be talking about the perils of free trade, specifically the Trans-Pacific Partnership. With me, I have a couple of guests who have looked into this a whole lot. I have Marilyn Lorenz with the Interfaith Committee in Latin America. Marilyn, so glad you could join us.
I'm glad to be here.
And we also have Karen Webb with the Joining Hands Network. And what church is that part of?
It's the Presbyterian Church USA, part of the Hunger Program there.
Well, part of the Hunger Program, and I'm very glad to have you with us too.
Thank you.
Now, let me ask both of you, what did you think about the movie? Did you think that the information, the introduction that it portrayed was fairly accurate or not?
I think it covers the themes.
Okay, the basic themes in a very brief outline form.
I think so.
Okay.
Certainly.
Now, Marilyn, let me ask you, there was things that happened after World War II that affected the relationships between the United States and Latin America and set the stage for NAFTA to come on board.
Well, in the first part of the 20th century, the United States intervened militarily. We sent in the Marines anytime there was any kind of conflict. And after World War II, we continue to see the world in two camps, the East and the West. But we began to see ourselves involving more with what we call development. But that development was really dealing with the elites and not with a program that would benefit the people that needed land and needed more participation in the economy.
And so it basically was something to help U.S. commerce and to protect the elites.
Exactly. It comes back to the Monroe Doctrine.
Right. Okay. Now let me ask you, by the late 1980s, people were coming up with the idea of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and that was passed in the, 92 or 93?
94.
Well, it went into effect in 94, but
it was, well, they've been talking about it, right. After the wars were over, in the civil wars of the 80s, there was a real decision. In fact, I attended a conference where they said, we're going to now use our influence economically rather than militarily. And you can see it playing itself out now. So we had North American Free Trade Agreement in 94, 2004 CAFTA, and thereafter.
And what's CAFTA?
The CAFTA is the Dominican Republic Central America Free Trade Agreement. That was followed by Peru, and then Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. These are multilateral and bilateral trade agreements, which basically lower tariffs and open up the trade back and forth. But they're uneven.
So they claim to be free trade, but they're not really free trade. They just lower the trade.
An economy the size of the United States with the economy the size of a country like El Salvador. You know, El Salvador is the size of Massachusetts. You know, it's not even possible.
Right. Okay. Now, this had a lot of effect on Mexico, didn't it? When North American Free Trade Agreement.
When the trade agreement came in, the first thing, which would make people angry, actually, Mexico was required to change their constitution so that their farmers would no longer be subsidized and their land ownership would not be guaranteed. And so from there, then the United States sends its corn at a much lower price because we subsidize our corn farmers. And so the corn cost tripled in Mexico.
And that was just a total economic disaster.
Real prices dropped for Mexican corn, dropped 50 to 70%. So now the farmer's not protected, so they lose their land. And agribusiness comes in.
Right.
That's the simplest answer to it.
Okay, and what sort of effect, was that good for Missouri for this to happen?
Well, no. As far as corn farmers are concerned, yes, it was a good thing. But in terms of other jobs, because the free trade agreements are not just about corn, they're about manufacturing. And so Missouri lost 114,000 manufacturing jobs during the NAFTA period.
That's a lot for a state the size of Missouri.
Right. So 12,600 jobs displaced in Missouri. Another time, more in Missouri, 38,700, over 2 million in the United States due to the rise of the trade deficit with China since it joined the World Trade Organization. So all of these different organizations, different agreements benefit, actually it benefits investors. That's
so there's a smaller group of people who are
benefiting from all of these trade agreements.
So is that how it affects income disparities? Or differences in income between different groups of people?
Well, yes. I mean, if the investor's getting the money and the person working is now working for a lower wage because the jobs are leaving here for a lower wage out of the country, so the people here have to work for less to keep a job.
So it's what we've seen the income gap widening.
We see the income gap widening.
Something that
but I will say, just parenthetically, in the time of the Alba Revolution in Venezuela, Venezuela's income disparity has risen to the level of Canada. So it's just a kind of interesting thing when we have a collaborative trade situation versus one that benefits just the few.
Karen, I wanted to run some themes by you because you want to bring us up to date with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is sort of like the updated version of NAFTA and then CAFTA, except it would apply to what?
This has about 12 different countries along the Pacific Rim. It's sometimes been referred to as NAFTA on steroids. It's a trade agreement that is open-ended, for one thing. That means another country can join it at any other time, even after this is all negotiated and finalized. Another country can join in. Japan has just joined in, but there's talk about China also wanting to be a part of it.
Well, let me ask you this. One of the issues that people bring up is investor state chapter. I don't even know what that phrase means. Could you?
The investor state chapter makes it very, very enticing for corporations because they can go and invest in a country where wages are much less, where environmental regulations are much less, and they can invest in that country, and if that country for some reason wants to stop their production for some reason that maybe they're violating one of their environmental laws, say for instance, that corporation can then sue that government.
I've got two examples for that.
So it's not just a hypothetical for the
No,
for
this
the
is
future,
the real
it's
thing. This
actually
is the real
happening
thing.
now.
Actually, under NAFTA, there was a frontline program some years ago showing that a Canadian conglomerate wanted to put out of business a family funeral home business in Mississippi. And under NAFTA, they could sue them for not letting them take over the business. But the thing
amazing.
in El Salvador, I know it's really amazing, is the Pacific Rim Corporation is out of Canada, and Commerce Group is out of Milwaukee. Commerce bought a mine in San Sebastian mine in El Salvador some years back, and in '99 that mine was named one of the big polluters. I mean, and so Commerce Group was not allowed to continue working that mine. Well, they sued the country of El Salvador for $100 million because they could not make a profit. They couldn't mine. Pacific Rim began to fight back when they put out the flags along the gold vein.
Okay.
And the people went and pulled all the flags down and mailed them back to Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim set up a subsidiary in Nevada, sued for $77 million, and now they've raised it to $315.
So basically, it's really been hard on El Salvador.
Very hard. It couldn't put the country out of business. But the point is that El Salvador doesn't have the right to put a moratorium on mining, which is devastating in a country that small with that use of water that a mine would require.
And so, Karen, what does this mean generally for the courts, for the domestic courts of the United States or any country that participates?
When there is a lawsuit by a corporation against one of the governmental entities, it is not tried in that country where the offense or the offense is happening. It's tried either through the UN or the World Trade Organization by 3 individuals, and they make that decision. And most likely it's tried, comes in favor of the corporation. There have been 450 such cases already.
Now, the overwhelming majority of those are by richer countries against poorer countries, but theoretically, could that happen to the United States? Could the United States have its domestic laws overturned by a panel that it did not elect?
Certainly, because there's more and more foreign investment in the United States now. The tables could be turned.
And so the United States could find it subject to control by Japan, or the Philippines, or Australia, or any of the countries party to the TPP.
Yes.
Canada could sue us if we want to allow the Keystone XL to go through.
Wow. Okay, we're going to take a break, and we will be right back to continuing the discussion of what some of the effects of the Trans-Pacific Pipeline could be for the environment, for labor, and for human rights. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're talking about perils of free trade, and I have a couple of guests with me who are very familiar with the issue. I have Karen Wilson with Joining Hands Network, and I have Marilyn Lorenz with Interfaith Committee in Latin America. Now, we were just talking about some of the things that the Trans-Pacific Partnership I think I messed up and said Trans-Pacific Pipeline didn't last time. I think I have the Keystone Pipeline on the back of my mind with these international trade things going on. That's why I slipped up, but it's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And am I correct that what that basically does is to lower a lot of the tariffs between the United States and other countries around the Pacific Rim, so that it's easier to move goods back and forth, even though we're taught in environmental studies to buy locally. We'll buy Trans-Pacific afterwards, even more so. But what's even more important is that it would make it very difficult for a country to protect itself with its own internal laws with environmental and labor standards that that a corporation can sue a country. So these are some of the big dangers that we're talking about.
Sure.
Okay, now tell me, what is the Dodd-Frank legislation, and how does that fit into this whole issue of international trade deals?
Well, part of the Dodd-Frank legislation, that was the Wall Street Reform Act.
Yes.
Which is supposed to protect our economy. Under that, there's a provision whereby when a corporation wants to go into another country and do business, and this is mostly the extractive industries, they pay big bucks to those countries. However, those countries do not use that money to help the individuals who are affected by that, say a mining operation or something. People are forced off their land because they don't have a certain piece of paper that says they own this land. They're just pushed off. And that corporation comes in and they make money, the government officials have made money, but the people are just pushed off. And part of this Dodd-Frank legislation was something that would make those payments to the governments transparent, so the people in those countries would have a right to have something to stand on, to fight back for something that they should really be getting. And right now the American Petroleum Institute is fighting that legislation. It's being implemented. It's supposed to be implemented through the Securities and Exchange Commission.
It sounds like something that might be overturned with the lawsuit if somebody says, you know, we want to be able to make a profit, and concerned about the welfare of the people whose land is being taken would interfere with our profit. Marilyn, do you think that's conceivable that would be actually
very possible? It happens all over the place. The Rio Negro massacre in Guatemala was about that same kind of thing.
Okay, so it's a very real issue. Now, what you're talking about has been referred to a lot as land grabs. Generally, when people in a rich country buy up a lot of the land or land rights of people in a poor country. Now, am I correct that this has happened in Guatemala, that there have been some real issues? I'm sorry, I meant to say Colombia. In Colombia, that there have been some real issues in Colombia.
Yes. In Colombia, 40% of the whole country has either been licensed or license applied for by mining corporations. This has pushed a huge number of people off their land in Colombia. And they are pushed off. They don't have anything, you know, they just have to leave. And they're in a sort of a community of several people who've been pushed off their land. And last month now, it's in April 12th, a man was shot point blank in the face in his home while he was asleep. These people are being threatened because they're speaking out for their rights. And when you have 40% of a country...
That's an enormous amount. That's like America east of the Mississippi, or even...
It's amazing, yes.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to... that I was thinking of when both Marilyn spoke earlier and when you were describing this, is that whether we're talking about Mexico or Colombia, if people lose their jobs and lose their land, all that's going to do is to increase illegal immigration enormously. And so no matter how many walls you build or no matter how many laws you pass, if people cannot get a job in Mexico or Colombia, wherever we're talking about, necessarily they're going to try to immigrate to another country. And that's very likely the U.S. because even though wages have been going down, they're still higher than they are in Colombia.
Within Colombia, you have one of the highest numbers of internally displaced people, those people that have lost their lands. I've seen the sugar plantations that have taken over people's lands.
And the food that have been grown on those farming lands are going to then be mines. So therefore, there's going to be a food shortage in those countries as well.
Earlier, you had mentioned me before to bring up the issues of affecting the poorest people and the environment. And is this basically what you're talking about? Is the environmental issues of the mining companies destroying the ability to grow food?
Exactly.
Because what do you use to extract mine? It's microscopic corn. What am I thinking? It's microscopic gold.
Okay.
And it requires cyanide. So a mine uses in one day the amount of water a family of 5 uses in 20 years.
And that's incredible. So,
Isn't that something?
So what do they do with the water after they
Well,
have
you just drain it off into the back into the stream,
So
back into the river.
So are you saying that cyanide is not particularly good to drink?
The last time I went to chemistry class, it told me not to, so I think probably
Are you saying
not.
that cyanide would not be particularly good to grow crops with?
Probably not. I'd say no. But you know, there's another thing besides taking land for mining. There's this privatization and the auctioning off of resources. And now in El Salvador, there's a public-private partnership, the P3 law, in which the United States is trying to force El Salvador to auction off ports, airports, roads, and higher education.
So these would just be up for sale?
They're all up for sale. They've done it in Honduras already. They did this in 2010. So, and these concessions for public services, it's sort of like the fight over water here in St. Louis that's been going on. 40 years. 40 years, these concessions would go on. They would pay and the contractors that lose the bids would get 1% of the contract. So they're going to get paid even if they don't get the contract. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on.
Wait, when you say that about higher education, I wonder if it could apply to public education too. I wonder.
Well, that's what higher education is, public education in El Salvador.
Oh, it is in El Salvador.
There are plenty of private universities, just like we have. But
okay, well, I just wonder if it could apply to like high school and
probably would work its way down.
In other words, if Japan or Australia could say, "Oh, we want to buy the high schools in the city of St. Louis," you need to. You know, we want to buy a whole series of charter schools. I guess they might have the right to bid.
See, in Salvador, the country doesn't. The Department of Education owns the lands,
right.
But the current government has created free education all the way through high school.
Right.
So the people would go up in smoke, but the higher education is quite for the elite still.
Okay, now what other sorts of things have happened in El Salvador, largely as the result of NAFTA?
Oh, just on a personal health level. Because of all the exporting from this country, we have every junk food that is on the planet and all the sodas. And so I've seen over the 20 years that I've gone to El Salvador, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, all kinds of ills that were not there before all of this junk food came in.
I've seen that documented in medical journals and in Scientific American, how the obesity rate in Latin America has just zoomed upwards.
Ridiculous.
As they adopt American food patterns, and they're being exported even more and more and more.
Well, farmers aren't growing food to feed people because it costs twice as much to grow it than it does to sell it. So they can't afford to grow.
Okay, and it just makes me wonder if the next thing that the U.S. is going to export is going to be the weight loss clinics, which...
Well, there's a concept.
You could, okay, listen.
Actually, I did see curves in San Salvador.
Less than a minute left, but Karen Wilson, could you summarize what you think the most important idea for a viewer to take with them would be?
To get this negotiations out in the open. Right now it's being negotiated in secret. And it very likely is going to be tried to be pushed through fast track through Congress. So we need open transparency.
Marilyn, we only got about 10 seconds left, so very briefly, what's the high point of this?
Free trade is not fair trade, and it does not work.
Okay, so we have the experience of both NAFTA and CAFTA. I want to thank both of you for participating in the discussion with this episode. I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in to this episode of Green Time, and I hope you tune in this time next week.